So we are beginning with the squat. So we are of the belief that it doesn't really matter who you are, you should be in a position where you're able to squat. Now, what we're not saying is that every single program and every single week for the rest of your life you need to squat, or you need to actually barbell squat at all, but you should be in a position where you can, if required, or you're moving towards that goalpost in a systematic way and you have the appropriate measures to be able to get you there eventually. So, if you guys are working towards goals of being both leaner and stronger and building muscle, we should be able to execute this to a high standard in some capacity. So if we have a think about what the squat actually is, our goal is to go from a standing position, maintaining the upper body position and the lower body coming down into a seated position with our hip crease falling below the top of the knee. So making sure that we're hitting depth and standing back up. So if we then start to consider the road to a back squat, we know that not everyone is going to need to squat all of the time, like I just mentioned, but we do want to be in a position where we can do that and we don't actually have any roadblocks or inherent problems stopping us from getting there. So if we start to consider the general rules of the setup, one of the most common mistakes that we see in the gym when it comes to a squat, aside from ego lifting quarter squats, is trainees not taking the time to get tight. So as a total beginner, even performing a bodyweight squat to a bench with, no load at all, finding tightness plays a huge role in the effectiveness of the lift. So for stronger trainees, can be the difference between failing a rep or making it, or getting injured or not getting injured. So now we need to start to consider, how does that happen? What do we need to do in order to put ourselves in a position where we are, creating tightness and maintaining as much rigidity as possible to have a successful lift? So an analogy that we like to use is, imagine someone was holding up like a pool noodle, pressed the long way against your sternum. So what they're going to do is take the hammer and hit the pool noodle on the end. Now we want to think about how much is that impact going to bother you? On the flip side, if they took a steel rod and they held that in the same spot and they hit that with a hammer, how would it feel? So because the pool noodle isn't rigid, the force generated from the hammer is going to go throughout that noodle. Now, on the flip side, the steel rod is going to drive all of the energy from the hammer directly into your sternum, and it's going to cause a much greater impact. So when we're lifting, we want to think about being the steel bar. We want to be as stiff as possible, as rigid as possible, so we can drive all of our force into the bar through those target muscles. So this takes us to the brace breath, or the Valsalva maneuver. So this is a technique that we use to maintain tightness during the core in the lift. So what we want to think about doing is taking a large breath into the lower ribs, so like the lower area of our stomach, and contract the core. So thinking about pushing against the air, pushing our stomach out and holding that tension for the entire rep. So for a lot of people who are maybe using like a weightlifting belt, it's a really good feedback system because we can actually feel ourselves pushing out against that belt. So the full Valsalva is when you only take one breath at the lockout for each rep, and this is recommended for loads of 85% or more. So typically that's going to be like 5 reps or less. So this rep range is what requires maximum tightness to effectively move the most amount of weight safely. So think about someone who's powerlifting or in the middle of a strength block. It's like we're looking at the loads that we're moving, and we need to make sure that we're resetting for each rep, and we are taking the time and the intention to make sure that we're getting as tight and rigid as possible. So then we've also got the half Valsalva, is where you breathe out and in again during the top third of the movement. So this is typically going to be for less than 85% intensity, so 6 reps or more. If we're doing the full Valsalva here, it's just going to cause diminishing returns. It's going to get really fatiguing. For a lot of people, we can start to get lightheaded just from like the repetition of breathing in and out so excessively. So again, we want to start to think about the half Valsalva for anything 6 reps or more to make sure that we're not sort of running ourselves into the ground.